One. Okay.
Good morning! Monday morning this time. Happy Mondays with Mark. Mark Honlock, Director of Horticulture here at Green Bay Botanical Garden. Wanted to share some tips, kind of late-ish or late summer, I guess we'll call it, tips. There's a lot to do in the garden, a lot happening, a lot of things that we kind of talked about in the past that we can bring back together for today. So a few things I want to share with you. One is check out this amazing landscape here of a seeded prairie. It's actually in a detention basin at Green Bay Botanical Garden here. So it was a seed mix planted as part of our Grand Garden project, and it's in its full glory now here in the late summer. So it looks really awesome. And if you're interested in, kind of doing something like this, there is still time to do like a fall seeding of prairie plants, or the other time to do it is in spring. So if you look at Prairie Nursery's website or Prairie Moon Nursery, they have some really good information on how to prepare your site to be successful, because you do have to do a lot of work like beforehand to make it work well. So wanted to share, this is a blue Vervain. Really love this plant here. It reminds me of my time in Madison, kind of traipsing around the prairies around there. And you probably know this guy here, bee balm, Monarda fistulosa. That's our native bee balm, and it's not having a ton of bees, though there's a couple here actually that Rachel can go in on. So it's a little cloudy today, but when it's sunny, those guys are really alive with bees. This plant here is called the cup plant, and it's kind of cool. It's really tall and big, but if you look here, it has these perfoliate leaves. The leaves are around the stem, so it actually holds water. So it's like a little nature's bird bath or bird fountain where birds, insects, other animals can get a drink of water. So that's really awesome. One thing to know about these guys is they can be a bit aggressive. So sometimes if you see a prairie planting, it might become olive cup plant. So you might want to consider deadheading. In this area, you can see that there's a lot of other things too. So it seems like it's competing pretty well right now and being held in check. But again, it's pretty early in this planting. So
Mark, for this specific cut flower, how far down would you prune or cut back?
You could prune or cut it back anywhere you wanted to. The main thing would be to take off, the thing that could become a seed up here, the flower obviously, which would become the seed. So you could cut it just right back here, or you could cut it there if you don't like the look of the three little prongs up there.
Mm-hmm.
And you could really go anywhere you wanted to on it, honestly. I wouldn't just like cut it to the ground though, but it will probably come back. Which reminds me of something I was going to point out, and I forgot to tell Rachel ahead of time, but like in here you can see this year we didn't cut this down because of everything that was happening with the pandemic and not having enough staff. So we actually left the old debris up here, which is what it would look like in a natural, type ecosystem. So the insects and other overwintering things could emerge from this, and it wouldn't be caught and put in a compost pile or burned or things like that. So it's kind of interesting to see how everything is growing up and hiding that. So it's kind of like the way you could do it in your own yard is you start thinking ahead already for your fall cleanup. Like maybe this year you want to leave more stuff up to have habitat and to have things overwinter in there. Okay, so that is kind of the natural prairie seeded option. And I was going to go to the other side of the trail over here in the Grand Garden area, the Matt Schmidt Garden, and show you just some of these sedges here. Sedges are native plants typically, and they're kind of becoming more popular in landscaping. Is kind of a similar look to grasses, but they can take more shade and they can take more moisture. So this is kind of a drainage swale actually that drains some of the new construction at Green Bay Botanical Garden, relatively new. So you can see there's this little mountain sedge here, this really a cool looking sedge, Carex montana. We got that from Roy Diblick down in Northwind Perennial Farm in Burlington, Wisconsin area. And then here's a blue sedge, and you can really see how it is blue compared to that green Montana sedge, which is kind of like chartreusey. And then over up here we have fox sedge, which is another native. So both Prairie Moon and Prairie Nursery, of course, have these sedges too, because a lot of them are native. And it's just a different look and a way to get kind of that grass texture into a shaded or wetter environment. So they're kind of something to look into if you are a budding horticulturalist. Another thing you can do this time of the year, if you haven't already, is consider the mulching. So we just remulched this area here. And what I call it maintaining the gain. So we go through and we weed everything, and then we put our nice 2-inch layer or 3-inch layer of mulch so that those weeds just don't keep coming back. Because if we weed it and then we don't do that, they can just keep coming back, and it's like an endless vicious cycle of us having to weed and not get to other projects. And you can see here where they did not dare to cover the flare on this birch tree when they did it. So they did it right. They did a great job. The other thing I was going to quick mention was You know what it's not a good time to do is to prune trees and shrubs. So what you would do if you prune now is you'll stimulate new growth. The next 3 buds, if you remember from our way back, late winter, early spring pruning, would grow. And now, since it's in August, that new growth won't have time to harden off, you know, to get ready for the winter time. So what you'll do is you'll have new growth. It'll be kind of like not hardened off, and then it'll be more likely to die back in the winter time. So you want to wait on your pruning. You could prune a dead branch, you know, if it's something like that, because it's obviously not going to stimulate new growth. So that is something you could do still. Or if it's like a broken branch because of a storm or something like that, that's good to go. But typically you want to wait on all your pruning now until fall or late winter. So I just wanted to also mosey up here a little bit, show you a couple things. One thing you can do with perennials especially is, you know, if you want to, you can deadhead things so they don't produce seed, because that'll take up energy from the plant, especially if it's a new plant this year and you want to get it established. Typically first year plants will deadhead so that they can put their energy into roots in the crown and getting established and make it through the winter. The other thing is, this guy has some powdery downery mildew, so if you have diseased foliage, you could consider pruning it off now. And this penstemon here, you can see it has nice rosette of lower leaves. So what you could do is kind of like clean it up by pruning all these stems off. If you didn't want, you definitely would want to get rid of the diseased foliage. You could deadhead it so it doesn't put energy into there and gets established. And then you have this nice little clump. So we're not going to do it through this huge prairie restoration-y type landscape, but it is something you could do in your garden if you have plants like this in a perennial garden, say. And then you wouldn't have that disease to spread to other plants. So this area here of the Matt Schmidt garden, we kind of have like almost a manufactured prairie type landscape, which I think I've already talked about many times. But I wanted to show you this Agastaceae funiculum, the lavender hyssop, one of my favorite plants. And you can see it had bumblebees on it before, but it also now has our Japanese beetles on, which we talked about knocking into soapy water. So, you know, now is the time of the year when the Japanese beetles are pretty prevalent. And you got to think about how you want to control those guys if you do. But another interesting thing about the Agastaceae is, even though it's a native, look how much it seeds out here, and it can become a little bit aggressive too, like we talked about the cup plant. So a lot of times we'll weed out those little seedlings where it's kind of overtaking other good plants that we want too. But we do love it because it is a pollinator magnet and it is a nice native plant. So in this Matt Schmidt garden, you know, we do have the native Agastaceae. We have the little blue stem, which I was going to point out that our grasses are now starting to flower. So that's a neat little thing to appreciate, is the flowers of grasses, little blue stem, big blue stem, the Canada wild rye up in that other garden we were looking at, Indian grass, switchgrass, pretty much all those grasses are starting to bloom. So appreciate the flowers on them, and then the seed pods as well. So we also have Calamintha nepeta, subspecies nepeta, Montrose white. Actually, I think it's nepeta Montrose white, my bad. But it's a non-native ornamental that is also kind of a pollinator magnet. Bumblebees especially seem to love it. So it's kind of an interesting thing here to show, you know, native, but then also ornamental plants that pollinators seem to be attracted to. And I wanted to point out this, we just added this little Phlox Jenna into this garden here amongst there. It'll get taller eventually. But I was listening to a presentation by Mount Cuba Center in Delaware, and they did trials of phlox and other plants they have online that you can check out. But it was interesting because they also tried to do a biological, ecological part of their trialing, and they counted the number of butterflies that went to different phlox as part of that trial. And actually this Phlox Jenna, even though it's a cultivar, attracted like 5 times as many butterflies as all the other phlox did. So like they were in the hundreds, and this one was like 546. So they speculated it was because it had smaller flowers, so more flowers per surface area, and then therefore more nectar. So it was just kind of interesting because the non-native cultivar, or the cultivar, nativar, actually attracted more pollinators. So just an interesting thing. So if you have the space and the ambition to make an awesome prairie garden and attract all those insects and all that wildlife, that's awesome. But if you want to just attract wildlife in a smaller garden area, think about looking at that Mount Cuba Center, other resources that tell you like how to get the most bang for your buck of the plants that you plant in there. So it was pretty fascinating to think about that. So
Mark, would you recommend, if people are more interested in just checking out types of native plants, to come visit the garden and visit the Schneider Family Grand Garden area just to walk around and see the wide variety of native plants that they could plant in their own yard?
Well, yes, that would be a great idea to come check out the Schneider Family Grand Garden at Green Bay Botanical Garden. There's a lot of natives, cultivars of native plants, and then ornamental plants that attract pollinators. We also have a lot of native plants sprinkled throughout our grounds, and it's really an area of emphasis here at the Botanical Garden, is to kind of, really think about adding more natives and being judicious about adding our other ornamental plants that attract pollinators. So you can get a lot of great ideas here. Another good resource are those, websites of Prairie Moon Nursery and Prairie Nursery. Also, the Wild Ones has a great chapter in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and Stone Silo Gardens, Prairie Gardens in Green Bay, De Pere area has, plants available for sale. So that's a great resource to get plants too. So the other thing I was going to say was, a lot of times we buy our plants at garden centers in the early springtime, and that flowers are what sell, so we buy those. So sometimes our gardens can be lacking in late summer, fall plants, flower power. So think about, visiting here to see what's in bloom, or going to your garden center, Schrader's, wherever that happens to be, and see what's in bloom. Like now we're going to be blooming later, to add to your garden, or think about, areas of your garden that you might want some flower power for.
I have a question from Susan here. She asks, is it still a good time to grow perennials, even though it's later in the summer?
I think it's always a great time to grow perennials. Yeah, I would say, it is just the beginning of August still too, so it's a time when you could add perennials to your garden. The thing to remember is, oftentimes August is a little bit drier, so most of our plants, we like to give an inch of water a week, so you might just have to water them a little more frequently in this time of the year to get them established. But we still should have August, September, and into October of a growing season, so there still should be time to get those established. The other random thought I will give you is that a lot of times you move or transplant perennials the opposite season of when they bloom. So your spring bloomers is starting to get to be a good time to transplant them now. So you'd want to transplant them, kind of like in this August-y time. Of course, give them the water, of when they bloom. So you wouldn't want to transplant the fall bloomers, or the late summer bloomers, but the spring bloomers, it starts to get to be the time where you'd want to transplant them now too.
Okay.
Yeah, so those are some thoughts about plants, about gardening here at Green Bay Botanical Garden. Check out our website, which is gbbg.org, or our Facebook for more information. Have a great Monday.